Today, as you can see the overall panel title I've already announced, I do want to say to recognize one other name that's up in the front of the room. That is our co-sponsor for today's event. That's the International Policy Center, the IPC over there, which is supporting this as well. And today's panel is one of a number of events which you may have noted going on around the university marking the anniversary of the Peace Corps, which has a very particular link to the history of the University of Michigan, which is one of the reasons why we're making it so central to what we're doing this fall in particular. And as this CREASE part of that broader undertaking, it's worth noting that the CREASE element of the history of the Peace Corps is a part of a very striking chapter of the history of the Peace Corps itself. That is the post-Cold War chapter. And we have with us today 4 different perspectives to shed light on that latest, most recent, most shocking perhaps from the perspective of those who would have been able to see the Peace Corps at its point of origination a half-century ago. That is in the former Soviet bloc and Eastern Europe and Central Asia and all sorts of places that one might not have expected the Peace Corps to have extend. We will be moving through 4 brief presentations by 3 current students and 1 employee at the university, all of whom have had a variety of roles and programs here. Some went into the Peace Corps before coming to Michigan, others after finishing their degree programs here. They have gone to different countries for their service. I'm just going to very briefly introduce them now, so I don't have to be interrupting the proceedings as we go. We'll be coming to them in order of their Peace Corps service, in case you're wondering what is the logic underpinning our organization here. And they'll each have about 10 minutes to talk about their experiences in the Peace Corps, and then I hope we'll have time for kind of general conversation, and everyone in the audience can feel free to ask questions and chime in and so on. We'll be going in the order, working my way outward towards the door. Will Nash, who can wave if he chooses to, will be the first you'll hear from. Now works as an immigration specialist at U of M at the International Center. He served as a teaching English as a second language teacher volunteer for Peace Corps, and that was in Ukraine. And so he is our deepest historical memory here, in a way, of Peace Corps. That is 2001 to 2003. In addition to teaching English, he began an American Culture Club and also has organized summer camps on environmental awareness and HIV/AIDS prevention. And he completed an MPA from the Ford School, the public policy school here in 2009. After Will, we'll hear from Mahima Mahadevan, who is to Will's left, who is a second-year master's student, also at the Ford School of Public Policy. She is also a U of M alum, having received an undergraduate degree in psychology in 2004, after which she also taught English as a second language, and she went into the Peace Corps in the Kyrgyz Republic in Central Asia from 2004 to 2006, where her projects included organizing girls' leadership camps, organizing English teacher training, and also starting a partnership with Habitat for Humanity and Peace Corps in the Kyrgyz Republic. She also taught English in Mexico, I believe, too, later. Our third speaker is Maria Smith, who is currently a dual degree student here in the Reese program and also in public policy. Before she came to Ann Arbor, Maria spent 2 years in the Peace Corps from 2006 to 2008 in Azerbaijan, where she also taught English language and set up a computer center for women, also supervised children's activity camps as well. And now in our programs here, she's studying history and politics of the former Soviet Union, especially in the Caucasus and Central Asia. And she hopes to go back to the region for more work after she finishes here. She came from Notre Dame, her undergraduate background before that. And then fourth and last, but definitely not least, we have Rutherford Hubbard, over by the door, who is also a dual degree student in the Reese program. He has his other hat in the law school here, and he is interested in particular in legal frameworks of post-communist reconstruction of societies coming out of conflict situations and the use of law in guaranteeing human rights during crisis. He served his 2 years in the Peace Corps from 2006 to 2008 as well, and he worked in Armenia, where he was program manager for a small local environmental NGO. And his secondary projects included summer camps for children on environmental themes, as well as designing solar houses. Is that right? Greenhouses? So you built lots of solar greenhouses, and sustainable agriculture. And Rudd, before coming to us, has a background as an undergraduate at Carleton College in Minnesota, and he has a background there in political science. So that is a very quick trip through the credentials and backgrounds and experiences of the 4 speakers you'll hear. All of them will then expand upon them in their individual time. Here we have pictures from some. We're leaving the lights up for the first 2 presentations that won't have the visuals, and then we'll turn them down thereafter. Let me start by inviting Will to come forward. Will Nash.
Thank you. I think I'm allowed to kind of have the most forgiveness from you because my experience was so long ago that some things are still a little bit hazy. It was back in 2001, 2003. And the reason I don't have pictures is because people didn't really have digital cameras back then, so I don't have that to share with you. I am just going to kind of talk about how I came to the decision to join Peace Corps, some of the experiences that I had there, what I feel like I accomplished, and kind of the legacy of Peace Corps now with what I'm currently doing and what I hope to do. One of the questions that was asked, oftentimes asked is, what was your motivation? So why did you join Peace Corps in the first place? It's a difficult question to answer because I don't think that there really is one motivation. I mean, I'd like to say that it was simply pure altruism and that I just wanted to serve for 2 years and help people that may be in less fortunate situations. But although that certainly is a motivation, and I think that's a motivation of any volunteer or any good volunteer, it certainly wasn't the only one that I had when I was thinking, well, do I want to do this Peace Corps thing or not? At the time, I did my undergraduate here. I was an English major and reading a lot of stories about the world and experiences that these authors were having, and I kind of said, you know, what have I done? I grew up in Michigan. I had never really traveled. I certainly didn't have dreams of going to Ukraine, but it was kind of like I want to have some sort of experience. I want to have a little bit of an adventure. And at the time, I thought, well, I'll travel through the U.S. and see some places that I've never been before. And that was kind of my plan initially. But I had a roommate, and luckily at U of M, Peace Corps is kind of such an institution, and people talk about it, and people talk about its founding, of course. And so he heard about Peace Corps and was just going to go to an information session here. And he said, well, I'm going to go learn about Peace Corps. I thought, well, wait a minute, that sounds like a lot of what I would like to do. It has the adventure component. It will give me something to really kind of expand what I've learned. Here as an undergraduate, it'll give me real practical experience. And at the time, I kind of was thinking, well, some of my colleagues are going to get a PhD. They want to be teachers. Some are going to law school. But I would kind of like to try things out before I jump into any kind of graduate program. And I did think that I wanted to teach, which was one of my primary motivations, actually getting some practical experience teaching English without having to get licensed or anything like that. So I could kind of jump immediately into it, and Peace Corps gave me the forum to do that. And I certainly did enjoy volunteering. I did volunteer as an undergraduate in a number of different programs, alternative weekends, and the scholars program that I was in. So I went through the application process. I went, of course, to that session. They talked about Peace Corps. I was very excited. It sounded like it really fit what I wanted to do. And then I started through the application process, and I'm sure that that has changed since when I did it, but it was this very long process, 8 or 9 months of kind of going back and forth and getting medical tests done and all of that stuff. And I remember, you know, that summer, getting that packet in the mail. I assume they still do that, but getting this very thick packet and just being like, wow, that is heavy. And thinking like heavy both in the literal sense as well as in, you know, like what this means for me. And it kind of at the time I thought, well, as an undergrad, I studied some French in LS&A, and I thought, well, I'll end up somewhere in Africa. I ripped open the pack and I saw Ukraine. It was like, wow, what image does that conjure up? And of course, the images were from when I was a child, of thinking of like Hunt for Red October or something like that. And so, I obviously over the next couple of months, I did as much research as I could, kind of learning about life in Ukraine, contacting other volunteers that had served in Ukraine, and really starting to think, wow, this is going to be kind of a very unique experience. Talking about it with my parents, who even had more images of the Cold War and what that would mean, and kind of saying, well, watch out for bears, and make sure you wear a heavy coat, and obviously all the stereotypes that go along with it. And I also remember getting that language tape in the mail too, and hearing. I'm sure I'd probably heard Ukrainian before, but never really paid attention to it. So popping it in and just being kind of overwhelmed with hearing a language and realizing that that's what I would be doing for 2 years. I think I listened to it for about 2 minutes, and then I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's just kind of intense to think that you would have to learn a language to actually function in a country. So, I did all of the research that I could in preparation. Obviously, you can never really prepare for an experience like that. And I remember kind of not long before I was set to leave, I had a dream, and in that dream, I was actually with Peace Corps, and the Peace Corps, I guess, director, whoever it was giving me a gun, and he was strapping ammunition on me, and he said, okay, now you can go, and you're going to go to Peace Corps. And I remember even in the dream kind of appreciating the irony of that whole image. Of course, Peace Corps certainly was not so dangerous, and I never carried a gun while I was in Ukraine. But I was actually supposed to leave on September 13th of 2001, and on, of course, September 11th, we know what happened. And I remember getting a call that morning from a friend, and the friend said, you got to turn on the news, we're being attacked. And I remember thinking, man, wouldn't it be something if Eastern Europe had kind of like joined together and attacked us right now at this time when I'm set to go to Eastern Europe? Of course, that's not what happened. That was kind of a delusion in my sleepy state. And I was delayed from leaving by about a month and a half. We were supposed to leave September 13th, and we left October 23rd. And so it gave more time to kind of like think, based on what happened on 9/11, is this, am I going to still do this? We don't know. They just put it off. They didn't say exactly when we'd be leaving. So it was kind of, are we going to leave at all? What is actually going to happen with Peace Corps? And a number of the other volunteers that were set to go to Ukraine actually did not. They dropped out. And I certainly can't question the motives of people that didn't end up going. But during that kind of month and a half or so, it really kind of crystallized that this is something that I really, really wanted to do, as opposed to going the other direction and saying this is something that I don't want to do. In terms of my expectations there, I guess if meeting them or not meeting them, it's kind of hard to say what images I had in my mind and how they actually translated to the reality of living in Ukraine. I learned one thing for sure, which is that I didn't want to be a teacher. It is a very tough job. I think I was thinking of my English degree and upper-level English courses where everybody takes themselves too seriously and you talk about all these very, philosophical concepts. When you're teaching 14-year-olds, you don't talk about philosophical concepts. You're lucky if you can keep their attention at all. And the fact that I didn't know any Ukrainian Russian when I went in meant that my students obviously could say basically whatever they wanted to each other, and I wouldn't have an idea of what they were talking about until quite a long time into my service. So there were definitely rough days where you go into a classroom and you feel like, wow, I'm barely a babysitter because I can't even get them to pay attention to me. But I definitely got better at it. And in terms of adventure, I certainly experienced a lot of adventure in Ukraine as well. Did a fair amount of traveling, met a lot of great people. But I think one thing that maybe I didn't expect was that first few months, Peace Corps can be really, really boring. I mean, everybody's like, wow, adventure is calling. Are you going to pick up the phone? Well, for 2 months, it was a very isolating experience, and that I certainly was seeing people every day. I was going to school, I was working, But I had difficulty really meeting people, and part of that is probably cultural, where it can take a long time before you really start to become friends, and people won't really invite you out all the time, and before you really become part of their circle, you really have to kind of earn that trust. And so I remember the first couple of months being like, wow, is it going to be 2 years of sitting in my apartment and, trying to learn Russian and feeling kind of isolated. Now, of course, all of that changed pretty quickly, but I think those are parts of Peace Corps that you don't think about when you're, considering whether or not you want to join. But I did develop a number of great relationships. I still keep in touch with a lot of Ukrainians. Earlier this month, I was actually in D.C. I was the best man at one of my fellow Peace Corps volunteers' weddings. And so that experience, I think, of going into a program like that, it can really be kind of an intense experience. And if you're going through it with other people, it can really kind of form those friendships and certainly make them lifelong. And the same thing with Ukrainians, where they understand that you're leaving in 2 years, but nonetheless, they're very interested in you. They're very interested in what you have to share, and they're interested in keeping in touch with you. I also didn't consider the fact that being an American in Ukraine was kind of made me almost a celebrity in some ways. There weren't a lot of Americans there, and so a lot of people were just interested to talk to me. People would come up to me if they heard me speaking English, and they would say, where are you from? Some of them had negative reactions. Some of them had Cold War reactions. The war in Iraq, of course, was fairly fresh at that time, and so I did get a lot of reactions of people saying, how could you do that, or why would you do that? And it was obviously difficult to sometimes manage those conversations and say, well, I don't necessarily agree with what's going on. And, a lot of times people didn't want to engage me in an intellectual conversation about it. But the attention was definitely something that was interesting, new, and kind of gave me almost an authority to talk about certain things that obviously I wouldn't be able to talk about here in the same way. So Peace Corps has kind of left obviously with my current job, I'm working at the International Center kind of directly as a result of that experience. I think if I had not done Peace Corps, I wouldn't have been interviewed. And our office is full of a number of people that have served in Peace Corps, and so it kind of obviously made it more likely that I would get the opportunity to talk about it. And it's also given me kind of a love for travel, a love for adventure. Since that time, obviously I've done a lot of personal travel, but about 2 years after Peace Corps, I went to Russia and served for 2.5 months in what was called the United States Russia Volunteer Initiative, where I did HIV/AIDS education with Russian youth. And certainly that was an opportunity that I had that I would not have had if not for Peace Corps. The language definitely is something that I've continued to maintain and that I really value. It's a huge thing to learn a language, and that's definitely something that I didn't realize when I got that tape in the mail. And that keeping it up is obviously a task in itself, but it's one of the things that I feel like I value most from my experience there. So one thing, just kind of a last story that I want to share from actually my time in Russia, and just to kind of show how going into a culture for 2 years and learning about it, learning a language, how it can kind of deeply impact you without you necessarily even being aware of it, was when I was finishing up that 2.5 months in Russia, we had this celebratory dinner, and one of the Russian employees, I was working at this NGO for HIV/AIDS awareness, there was myself and one other American who didn't speak Russian and hadn't been to Russia before. And my American colleague was asked, so, how does it feel to be an American in Russia? This is your first time here. What is it like? He kind of thought about it and he said, well, I'm having trouble answering this question. Why don't you ask Will? He's been here for a lot longer. And so the director's reply was, well, he won't really be able to answer that question because he's already kind of one of us. And I hadn't really thought of that in those terms, but I realized that a lot of my behaviors had just kind of become those of an Eastern European. And so even if you're not aware of it, living over there definitely has an impact at a very personal level. Thanks.
Mahima?
Hi, again, my name is Mahima, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Kyrgyz Republic from 2004 to 2006. So I think Will actually painted a very good picture of what it was like, what were the reasons that went behind joining Peace Corps, because I kind of went through that similar process. One difference, I also was an undergrad here at U of M, so I was, you were kind of immersed in Peace Corps. We were kind of lucky to be here because a lot of Peace Corps has a really great presence here. So one of my personal experiences was I was really involved with volunteering, kind of like Will. I was part of Alternative Spring Break, Habitat for Humanity, just a lot of volunteering opportunities. And what I really enjoyed about volunteering was the opportunity to meet people who were different from me. So a lot of times when you're in an institution or even within your home and community, you tend to congregate with people that are very similar to you on many different levels. But with volunteering, you're really exposed to a different group of people. And that's what attracted me to Peace Corps, was this opportunity to meet people that were different, of a different culture, background, language, and then to also live with them for 2 years. So I know when I got my packet that said Kyrgyzstan or Kyrgyz Republic, I actually had not heard of this country at all. And I thought I was, geographically aware, and I'm like, I know where, different countries are. And I was floored because I had never heard of this country, just never even really knew of that region. And I was scared, and it didn't help that my parents were freaking me out about it too, because they were like, how are you going to go there? It's a Stan country, it's near Afghanistan, and they really kind of, terrified me a bit. But and another thing about Peace Corps, and I don't know if this has changed a bit, but I didn't get too much information prior to leaving. So I actually thought that there was going to be a group of 5 of us, 5 or 10 going. So I was shocked when we went to, there's a little staging that happens right before you leave, that happens in the States before you go to your country. So I was shocked to see 60 people who were going to be part of my group. So little things like that, I just, maybe I wasn't so much, I tried to do my best to, make myself knowledgeable, but Peace Corps itself, just, part of the purpose of Peace Corps is that they aren't going to tell you this is exactly what you're going to do and how things are going to be, so you don't go in with that expectation. So it might make things a little bit scarier for you, but in the end, you're not expecting like these are the things that are going to happen within my 2 years, which I appreciate now after coming back. But I remember during the process the summer before, I was very nervous about what I was getting myself into. And another thing was with getting placement is that you don't get to choose which country you go to, and of course now I appreciate why that's there, because a lot of us only think very limited of, I can only go to these countries that I've either been to or I know something about. So now I really appreciate the fact that I went to a place that I would have never, ever, it would have never crossed my mind to even go to this region. So I just wanted to give you a few of my impressions before I went, and then once I got there. Before I left, I did some research looking on the internet, and I knew it was a former USSR country. One thing during our staging, one thing that all of the volunteers before we left, we all had learned was that a way that they honor their guests is they give the sheep's eye to the guest of honor. And that was something that all of us knew. We all somehow through different sources found out this one thing. And I remember during our staging, which was a 3-day thing, that was all we could talk about. We're like, and I was a vegetarian, so I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna do because I don't want to offend anybody. So that was just like you get these little snippets before you leave, and you don't really have a full full overview of what the country's about. And that's kind of how, besides the countries that I visited, that's how I and most of us understand other countries, is just through these little snippets. So then actually arriving in Kyrgyzstan, really the only travel I had done previous to that is that my parents are Indian, so I had traveled to India. So my idea of Kyrgyzstan was, I was thinking it was going to be like India a bit. So I was shocked when I saw it was just, it's not a very populated country. There's only 5 million, lots of mountains. And also just to see the former, the Soviet infrastructure there, and to see something, like Will was saying, from our generation, we don't know too much about the Cold War. We didn't have to experience it daily, but just this idea of what the Soviet Union was like, it was almost like mythology to me, to many of us. And so to actually see it physically in front of me, to see this, symbols were everywhere, the Lenin statues, victories, women symbolizing victory, the sickle and hammer. I mean, you saw it in person, and you just saw it in front of you. And to me, that's still throughout the 2 years, I was just kind of shocked to see just how much of, communism or the Soviet mentality was through these physical structures. And even the buildings, everything was very austere. The hotel that we stayed at the first couple of days were same thing, just very staid and austere. Nothing, but there was, and you could see kind of the other influences of other countries trying to lay their hand on Kyrgyzstan. There was a big Hyatt Regency, which was so like ostentatious. It was just completely out of place in the city, in the capital, and then Turkey was also had kind of was playing a big role in developing Kyrgyzstan as well. So you just saw all these countries trying to peddle their influence in Kyrgyzstan. So I had come in with the impression that the people there were going to be kind of the Russian mentality, maybe my mind maybe a bit colder or whatever I was thinking before. But I remember when about the second or third day you're there, you're placed with the host family. So immediately, you don't have any language, and they put you in a training village with the host family. And I remember all the volunteers were standing on one side, and all the host families were on the other side. And the last thing I would have expected was for my host mom to just come running to me, giving me a huge hug, big smile. Even when you think of Americans meeting other Americans, you wouldn't expect that kind of warmth. So just for her to come to and it was universal across all the host families and the volunteers, everyone kind of got that reception. And throughout throughout living with the host family, learning the language, and I had a different experience from Will because even after I started my service, I lived with the host family, which made me feel more integrated with the community, and I was able to kind of feel better established on a faster time. But one thing that really mattered to the people that I met, to my community and just outside of my community, was the fact that we learned the Kyrgyz language as opposed to Russian. And so there was, even though Kyrgyzstan, so they gained their independence in 91 and I went in 2004, they were still in process of just kind of connecting to their identity, finding their identity, really what it means to be Kyrgyz, their language, kind of relating back to being Muslim again, and their traditions. So you wouldn't believe, every time I went someplace and I went to the bazaar or wherever I went and I just spoke any amount of Kyrgyz, could be very little, immediately the person would be like, wow, thank you for learning our language, because they're very used to foreigners most likely speaking Russian. And it to me, it never really clicked what that meant, because we take English as English. Language doesn't really, we don't identify it as something more than that. But it was amazing to see that, kind of what that meant to them. And I just want to tell you about one more experience, because I had what I think is probably a very unique experience, because I was there in 2005 when they went through, I think they called it the Tulip Revolution, and it was kind of throughout Eastern Europe and Central Asia. There were a few revolutions going on. So there was one president who had started from 91 up until 2005, and Kyrgyzstan, I think, was considered probably one of the more progressive democracies out of that region. And so things were getting kind of worse during the past couple of years. People were getting frustrated with the leadership, and so there was this riot revolution that happened in the capital. It was interesting because there was a lot going on in the capital, and I was in a city that was further east, and it didn't so much affect what was happening to me or our community, but it was, and Peace Corps had everything in place to make sure all the volunteers were safe, and that was never so much an issue. What was fascinating was after that president was deposed and there was an election to elect a new president, and I remember going with my host mom first of all, I remember talking at the sitting at the dinner table with my host mom and her son, who's about my age, and with his friends, and whatever I could make out. But it was amazing. They were just sitting there, just conversations about democracy, just this excitement about what's going to happen to Kyrgyzstan, what's going to happen with our people, how do we get people more engaged, this is an opportunity, we need to really take advantage of it. And when people could go vote, they would vote at the school, and I went with my host mom, and there was just so much excitement. My host mom, after she voted, every single person she met in the village while walking back, did you go vote yet? Have you voted? I mean, everyone was just talking about it, making sure, and that was another difference, was that everyone felt, hey, not just responsible for my vote, but I'm responsible to make sure everyone around me votes too, because this is just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make a change happen. So I felt like I got to see kind of, democracy in its infant form, and which was very rare. And of course, Kyrgyzstan has, and I didn't, I think everyone was kind of excited and felt like this was something that is going to last. And I think, as we've heard, like, Kyrgyzstan has gone through some more changes recently, and so it's very difficult to feel like, okay, it just seemed like there was so much promise. What happened? But it's very unstable, and so whatever I could think of as my political take on it. But it was just, for me personally, it was just a very interesting time to be in that country, and I was just very fascinated by that. And then to close, I just wanted to give you one moment that I was really proud of, and it relates to Halloween. So I was a teacher there, so my students were 8th through 11th grade, and I never would have thought that they would grasp such an idea as Halloween, because it really wasn't anything similar to any holidays there. So in one class, I explained, okay, this is an American holiday. I'm going to try to throw a Halloween party. So if anyone wants to come, let's try to do a Halloween party. And I explained what it was. And I was floored. Like, I had about 25 of my students come, all dressed up in costume. I don't know how they came up. They were just so creative with their ideas. And I came in with this very lame costume because I was like, no one's going to really dress up. But I mean, they were so creative and came up with all these ideas of how to come up with costumes, using whatever resources they had. Obviously, they couldn't just go to a store and buy something. And to me, that was just something that I really appreciated about the whole experience. It was just sharing parts of me, parts of America, my culture, and then just the students and the community just really, they appreciated it. They really got involved with it, and it was just this exchange where I also then was able just to gain a lot of just information and just a lot of sensitivity to what was happening with them and their culture and in that region. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
And we can hear what she did with the sheep eyeballs, apparently later. So. Maria?
Let's see, how do these pictures work? Down arrow. Ah, okay. Well, sure, I can leave that one up. Let's start. As Professor Northrup mentioned, my name is Maria Smith, and I was in Azerbaijan from 2006 to 2008. I wanted to talk, I guess a good place to start is always expectations and motivations going into Peace Corps, but it's kind of a funny question. I remember at staging for Peace Corps when we were still in Philadelphia, being asked to fill out sort of an essay question about my expectations about Peace Corps service, and pretty much writing that I had no idea what to expect because I'd never been to Azerbaijan before, which in retrospect was probably about the wisest thing I could have written, because I really didn't have any idea what service was going to entail for me. With regard to motivations, I was extremely motivated. I really wanted to be a Peace Corps volunteer, so much so that when my application got delayed somewhat, which is not an uncommon occurrence with the Peace Corps application process, and I had to be pushed back a year into a second group, I worked 2 part-time retail jobs and sold treadmills and suits for a year because I couldn't think of anything else that I wanted to do as much as I wanted to go be a Peace Corps volunteer. But as far as why I wanted to be a Peace Corps volunteer, it's probably pretty standard. I thought it sounded interesting. It was a very unusual opportunity. I thought that it would be a good thing to do because, like so many of our college students, I've been told that volunteering is a very good thing to do, which I do think it's a good thing to do. But and it probably helped that I had an undergraduate obsession with Russian and Soviet literature. Unlike most people, I requested to be sent to the CIS, and Peace Corps was happy to accommodate me. I don't think that's a request they get very often, possibly because so many people don't really know very much about the region. But somewhat more interesting point to me, actually, is not what my motivations were, but what Azeri's thought my motivations were. I was in OZ4, the 4th group of volunteers in Azerbaijan, and I was the first volunteer to be sent to my site. This was our training site in Sumgait, Azerbaijan. This is the factory wasteland, and this is kind of what we were around for the first 3 months we were there. But my real site here in Gazakh was much prettier. So I was the first volunteer to be at this site. And naturally, people had a lot of questions about why I wanted to do this, what had brought me here. And a lot of them just did not believe that I had volunteered to spend 2 years of my life doing service for people that I had never seen before. That's not something people do. So they came up with various other reasons to explain why I was in Azerbaijan. Some of my favorites included the government made me, sort of like a replacement for conscription military service, that I was, I assume, a spy maybe, because nobody said this to my face, but my school director was asked to keep tabs on all my activities, so apparently someone didn't really trust my motivations. That I was too lazy to get married and take care of a family, and this was a convenient way out of it. And the one that was actually the closest to the truth, that I was there to Gazmak, which in Azeri in this context meant that I went to see somewhere interesting, talk to interesting people, just kind of generally go and have a good time and do something fun, which seemed a little less true in the middle of winter, but you know, there was some element of that to it, so that was maybe the closest. But it was a little strange, actually, that people were so suspicious of my charitable motives, because they obviously viewed me as an object of charity. For understandable reasons. I was far from home, I didn't have my family around, I couldn't really communicate with people there, I didn't really know how to take care of myself for the first several months that I was there. And we're always trying to do helpful things for me, which as often as not were more annoying than helpful. When my neighbor sent me a giant pile of buckwheat along with her child to make sure I ate it, she probably wasn't really understanding that I didn't want to gain a lot of weight from eating a lot of buckwheat while I was in Azerbaijan. But the point is that the motivations were very kind, and I was not always as appreciative of that as I should have been. But it took some time, both to convince people that I really was there because I wanted to participate in projects that would be helpful to members of their community, and also for both the people in my community and for me to understand what kinds of help were desired, and what kinds of projects would actually be something that my community would be receptive to. I'll talk about that maybe a little more in a minute, but I did want to say, compared to other kinds of traveling that I've done, Peace Corps is a completely different thing. I have traveled as a student, as a tourist. This last summer I was an intern at the Eurasia Foundation for Central Asia in Almaty in Kazakhstan. None of these are at all the same. When you travel in these ways, you're not someone's neighbor, you're not their teacher, you don't have a person that you always buy your potatoes from at the bazaar. You're not somebody's host child. And it's a completely different kind of experience. You get to see a place in a depth that would never be possible otherwise. I've got these out of order, but I like this picture. This is from Nowruz, which is sort of the biggest holiday in Azerbaijan every year in March. This is, well, the guy in the middle, this is kind of a tradition there. They have sort of comic characters that they dress up as, so this is one of their comedian characters. But this little girl that I'm holding there, I met her on my first day when I went to my project site, to my permanent site. Her name's Hadija. It was her first birthday, so I remember being at this party and thinking that we were the only two people at this entire party who could not express our thoughts to anyone around us. And we were pretty much learning Azeri at exactly the same time. But, you know, and I think she might even be wearing them here. She had pajamas that were Barbie pajamas, and she called them her Maria pajamas because I was the only blonde person that she knew. This is not an experience not a kind of experience that I've been able to have at any other point when I've spent time in a foreign country. And on a slightly different note, compared to other kinds of service and employment in foreign countries, people who work at say at the State Department or at USAID, by the nature of their work, can't be out in these communities all the time permanently the way that Peace Corps volunteers are. So it's different, I think, in the sense that for a lot of people, a Peace Corps volunteer is maybe the only American they ever meet. So this is the only time when I've gone somewhere and felt like I was the face that people were associating with the United States. Which is pretty, I mean, obviously over time as there are more Peace Corps volunteers, it's more than one face, which is probably good because I'm not very comfortable being the only face of the United States that people know. I'm not sure that's a responsibility I want. But in that way, I think Peace Corps is extremely unique. As far as my sort of achievements during Peace Corps service, what I'm proud of having done. Peace Corps volunteers do a lot of different kinds of projects, and I did too. I was an English teacher, worked with children's camps, with various different kinds of clubs. I think the single project that I am proudest of, which is probably why I made it into Professor Northrop's introduction, was the computer center that we set up at my NGO. This was the NGO where I volunteered, and this is actually the entire NGO. It was one room. Young Leaders Training and Development, but we, about halfway through my service, decided to turn this into a computer lab because although there were a lot of internet cafes in the region, they were not socially acceptable places for young women to go. And when we did a survey at the university, most of the female students had never used a computer. So this was something that I felt like was valued by the people I was working with. It really could have an influence on them. It's not that big a project. It was a $2,400 project, but it was the one that I think I was really the most proud of participating in. And I think the other thing that I am most proud of from my service is just the fact that people in my community, maybe not all of them, but the ones that I knew, came to trust me. By the time I left, they did not think I was a conscript or a spy or lazy, maybe a little bit lazy, but not as my overwhelming characteristic. That people trusted me to engage in these kinds of projects and to teach their kids and to work with their young people, and that they wanted to work with me. The impact of Peace Corps for me after coming back, I had sort of thought after finishing Peace Corps, I remember coming back and thinking I was going to go and try to find some kind of non-Azerbaijan related job and start some kind of career, which is obviously not how things have turned out. Because it turns out I can't really leave it alone. I really love studying this region. I love working there. That's what's brought me back here. And I am really lucky to have had the chance to go and do that, and lucky to still be having the chance to do work that's related to that region. I don't know precisely, as I think most people, most students that I know probably don't know exactly what it is that they want to do. But I am proud to have the chance to work this experience into my career and to know that whether I end up doing work for the United States government, whether I end up at a development organization, whether I end up studying further at a higher level, that this will be a part of what I bring to that. And I think that's about all I really want to say.
Red, our fourth.
Yeah, so my name's Red Hubbard. I was in Armenia from 2006 to 2008. And what I want to talk about a little bit more today is the role of the Peace Corps more broadly in the post-Soviet world. And I think, on one hand, maybe I'm not entitled to talk about that, right? I was only in one small country. But listening to the responses of the other returned volunteers, I think actually there is a lot of commonality. So I'm glad that I took this approach, and hopefully we can kind of draw that out. But maybe first I'd like to highlight one major difference. And we just heard a great story about the elections in Kyrgyzstan. Really enjoyed that. Thank you. We had elections when I was in Armenia as well. We had 3 of them, actually. One of them was horribly corrupt. The other one resulted in the massacre of protesters. The third was local in my city, and it was contested between the local mafia boss and a mafia boss who drove down from Georgia of Armenian ancestry to try to buy the election from him. People knocked out telephone wires, shut down the internet. There was like fighting in the streets. Maybe 20% of the population actually turned out to vote. And then after the vote count, the 2 camps were actually set up on opposite sides of my street, which was kind of fun, with baseball bats, waiting to fight out who would be the winner of the election. Fortunately, the mayor had enough control over the police at that time that he was able to avoid any direct violence at that point, and he's still the mayor today. So, hence the title of my presentation, Wi-Fi, Mafia Protection, and Cooking the Books. And this is the mayoral's office in the beautiful city of Ichivan, Armenia. You'll have to forgive me, I'm a law student. We do PowerPoints, we get very serious. I hope that's okay. So, what is the role of the Peace Corps in the post-Soviet world? It's very different than what you might think of when you think about Peace Corps. You think Africa, you think digging wells, immunization, sanitation. There you're confronted with generally a very well-educated populace, high levels of technology, and sometimes infrastructure. I had Wi-Fi in my house. I didn't have water. I didn't have heat. And there was actually holes in my walls. Like I could see through them. And it gets cold in Ichivan. I mean, it snows. So there's this kind of weird interaction there. Also, you have to think about reconstruction as opposed to development. When people ask me about my community, the closest thing I can compare it to is Detroit. It was a big manufacturing center in the 1970s, 80s, mostly carpets, but some other things as well. It's since lost more than half its population. Unemployment's probably about 80%. And it looks like a ghost town. I mean, you have abandoned factories everywhere. So how you as a volunteer can succeed in an environment like that is very different than you might in a development atmosphere. You have entrenched corruption, you have mafia, you have people who feel that they know how the economy should run. They have very high expectations. They're not going to be satisfied with anything less than what they had before. And lastly, you have the role of the volunteer. I think Maria did a really great job of talking about the experience in the Caucasus and how friendly it can be, but also how suspicious it can be. I had rocks thrown at me. I had trash thrown at me. I was harassed pretty much every day for 2 years. I also made some of the best friends of my life, and I've never met people who were more kind to me. So that's a real difference, I think, than what you'd find in a village where you're either accepted by the village or you're not. The wrong button. Okay, so just real briefly to put this into some context, I worked with a very small NGO. Like Maria, we had a one-room office. It was 2 brothers who were really great guys, loved the environment. While I was there, we were able to build the budget from about $2,000 a year to $50,000 a year. We expanded a group of summer camps for kids on environmental leadership from 1 camp to 12, I think, all across the country in almost every single province. And the year I came back, actually a year after I left to do some research, and they'd moved the camp into I don't want to call it a resort, but like a summer dormitory for kids. And they actually had a call from the Minister of Transport demanding that his son be admitted to the camp, which in a corrupt society is actually a really good thing, right? Like this is a major victory for them, so that was really nice. We also ran eco clubs. We drove around from village to village, talking about the environment, after school, getting kids involved. And I also think it's interesting, I want to point out, everybody I think said they did something with camps and clubs. One of the reasons, at least in Armenia, that we had to do that is most of the teachers wouldn't allow you in the school during the school day unless you bribed them. So a camp is something that you can do on your own. You don't need as many permissions, so it's cheaper. to implement. I don't know if that rings true for you guys as well, but that's kind of an interesting point. And then this down here is the solar greenhouse that we talked about. This was the third solar greenhouse to be built in Armenia. It was really fun. That's my buddy Arko right down there in the corner. And the idea was we were going to educate people about solar technology and organic agriculture. We did some education. A lot of people weren't interested. The kids were interested, which was great. And now they've got a small orchard there. They've got apiculture, I think it's called. They're raising bees. And last I heard, they turned this into a rose-growing hothouse, which is a great small business opportunity. Not necessarily the community organized thing we had intended, but still a great way for somebody to make some money. So who really gets the benefit? This is myself with my host family and extended host family. And for me, it was great. I mean, it's career development, it's personal growth, professional experience. I wouldn't be talking to you guys today. I wouldn't be here in Ann Arbor today if it wasn't for the Peace Corps. You also get great stories. I mean, really, you guys will agree with me, I think. You can pretty much end any party with the stories that you get in Peace Corps. On the other hand, what does your host community get? Really, I think more than anything, they learn English. The value of that cannot be overestimated. The doors that opens for somebody in a small country in the CIS are huge. They also get exposure to the Western work ethic. In Armenia, they like to drink at meetings, especially in the morning. That really kind of puts a damper on the workday. They don't really start the workday till 10 or 11. Lunch is 3 to 4 hours. And work is actually very poorly regarded. I mean, if you have to work for a living, you are considered very low class. The real goal is not just to be rich, but to not have to work and be rich, which makes a person who's a volunteer working for free somewhere below the lowest of the low. But, you work with people and you try to convince them that there actually is a word in English for volunteer. There's not a word in Armenian for volunteer at all. I mean, there's something similar, but not that similar. The last one is real development opportunities. And I think this is where I want to focus just a little bit of our time. Does the Peace Corps really have an impact? Are we creating business? Are we creating education opportunities? So, we ask ourselves always, is the work sustainable? And I think in my case, some of it was, a lot of it wasn't. I mentioned that the camps are still going. They've done a number of projects after I left, but not nearly as many as they did while I was there. But I also think you have to ask, is that really the point? We always ask ourselves, is this sustainable? Is this sustainable? Well, what if you had an impact on somebody's life? What if you were able to get a job for a few people? Is that a positive benefit from your Peace Corps service? And I think it is. And last, what does it mean to become a part of a community in the first place? And I think when we talk about the post-Soviet world, we really have to rethink what we are expecting of the Peace Corps and how it can reach those goals. You're not going to become part of a community the way you would in an African village that's a 5-day bike ride from the nearest city. I was 2 hours from the capital. I had my internet. Everybody had satellite TVs. Again, no water, satellite TV. It's a personal choice. So yeah, I just think those are things we need to think about when we think about the role of the Peace Corps in the post-Soviet world. And lastly, I know a lot of people are down on the Peace Corps because it doesn't necessarily accomplish things that we would like it to. You send a Peace Corps into a village, the village is not going to become Ann Arbor, right? But you might be able to have a positive impact on some people's lives in that community. And just to keep this in mind, the entire international budget of the U.S. Peace Corps is still less per year than the U.S. Naval Band. So if you think we do better work than them, that's up to you. I don't know if you have music lovers in the audience. The last thing I wanted to share with you guys, and this is just kind of a super small world idea. This is taken from the highway about maybe 10 kilometers from where I lived. It's a beautiful scene looking across the border to Razak, where Maria was living at the exact same time, no more than 20 kilometers away from me. So funny how these things kind of come together. So thank you.